You don't want to stunt your growth like I did if you want to reach that dream of sounding like your favorite pro drummer. Like probably every drummer, I struggled with figuring out how to practice quietly. Maybe you're able to relate. And when I was in high school, I came up with some decent at the time quiet practice solutions for my acoustic drum set. But looking back in hindsight, these really were not great solutions, and I ended up developing a very bad habit that we're going to talk more about today. Today I'm sharing with you the better methods that I've learned since then so that you're practicing effectively and you're well on your way to mastering the drums even if you're having to practice quietly. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out with me today. I help hobby drummers and semi-pro players become the musicians that everybody actually wants to play with and wants to listen to. And I do this by teaching you the core drumming skills that actually help you grow faster and therefore save you a ton of time in the practice room. And hey, speaking of saving time, how would you like a clear, reliable path that you know is going to get you from wherever you're at right now and you're playing to sounding like a session drummer, having that studio polished feel where you sound awesome and you're nailing songs and playing great with a band? What if you had an exact path that'll get you there? Well, I got you covered. I have a free gift for you in the description, a free PDF e-guide. It's called 6 Steps to Sounding Like a Session Drummer. What this guide does is it outlines the 6 growth stages I believe every drummer goes through. And so you'll be able to find and pinpoint which stage you're in right now. You'll easily be able to identify that and know where you're at, and then follow the action steps in there to then level up to the next stage. Everything is super clear, laid out for you. It guarantees growth. How would you like guaranteed growth? That sounds awesome, right? That way you know you're never going to plateau. You're always going to be growing. You're always going to know what the next thing is you got to work on. That is so key, especially when you're learning online and you don't have somebody right there next to you to keep you accountable. This guide will help keep you accountable. Let me be your guide. Let me guide you on this whole journey from beginner to session drummer. You can do this. That guide's in the description. You can master the drums even if you have to practice quietly. So whether you're a kid in high school playing in your bedroom, a college student playing in your dorm, an adult playing in an apartment, or maybe you're a dad and you got young kids and you've got to practice quietly late at night, this is for you. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to make sure that you are able to succeed and grow even if you're having to practice quietly. So let me share with you my mediocre quiet practice method. I'm going to put a picture up here on the screen because a picture is worth more than 1,000 words in this case. So my bedroom was above the kitchen as a kid, and so my goal was to keep things as quiet as possible, knowing there was going to be a lot of thumping, and my parents and family, my 3 siblings, would hear me down in the kitchen regardless. But I knew if the drums weren't full volume, I would probably be motivated to practice more, because I knew if it was totally crazy loud, I probably wouldn't practice much because it would just be crazy loud. And when you've got drums set up in a bedroom, they're loud, versus when you've got them in a big room or you've got, sound acoustical treatment and everything. So I knew I had to muffle things down, and that pretty much did cause me to practice more. I would play for hours every day. I would play all the time. But the problem is that, look at what's on the kit. I had those rubber mutes, those old school, I think you can still buy them, but rubber mutes that would have a way of deteriorating and disintegrating after playing on them for not very long. So I would put duct tape strips across them to keep them from disintegrating and deteriorating. And so as these rubber mutes on the drums are falling apart, I'm taping them up, putting more tape on there, and then I realized, oh, wait a second. I could just put a towel on top of both the snare and the rack tom, and that'll keep the rubber mutes from coming apart because I can just beat the towel instead. So I did that, and I threw a bandana over this, and I've got like a pillowcase over the ride, and all this junk on everything. So totally muffled down. And it accomplished the goal of motivating me or making it easy to play for hours every day. And it wasn't loud to my ear, and it wasn't entirely shaking the house. There was still some rumble, but it kind of worked. So what was the bad habit? Well, the bad habit that this whole setup created was never practicing on real drums. I would never take all that off and just play on the real drums. And so I kind of lost touch of what do real drums sound like? What do real drums feel like? Because I was just banging into pillows pretty much that didn't really have any rebound. I didn't know what I sounded like. So let's talk about 3 ways that this stunted my growth, and some of them are kind of obvious, but the first way is that I never actually heard what I sounded like. I was blasting music through my headphones, which was fun. I could hear the music and I was jamming out, playing along, but I just had no idea what I sounded like, and so I wasn't precise. I didn't know, okay, am I hitting the snare exactly when I need to? Are my kick drum patterns clean and even? Are my dynamics consistent? How am I mixing things? Am I making sure to not hit cymbals too loud? Am I hitting drums loud enough that they're nice and strong? those were things that were not even on my radar, totally unaware of, because I couldn't hear myself. I had no idea what I sounded like. And that was a serious problem. And like I mentioned a minute ago, the foam pads were deteriorating over time. The ones on the cymbals were falling apart too, so I was taping them up even more, which meant that the rebound was becoming less and less, and so the feel was just not good. So that was definitely a problem. As a drummer, as a musician, you've got to know what you sound like. How can you know if you're sounding good otherwise? And so that was not a very good thing that was happening. And so that kind of led into way number 2, that this was definitely stunting my growth, which was that I developed a habit of playing from my hands and not from my ear. Because I'd be jamming out to my music, blasting through my headphones, having all this fun. The song's getting big and exciting, so what do? Blast into a crazy fast fill, all over the kit. Okay, I think I came back in on time. I think I'm still with it. I was just having fun. Now, there's something to be said for just having fun and just being in high school and just having fun. Not caring whether or not you sound good, because there is a truth that as we get older, we get too in our heads and we start over-analyzing what we do, and we have a hard time having fun on the drums because maybe we're a perfectionist, or maybe we're over-analyzing what we're playing. Maybe you're an engineer. Maybe you come from an engineering analytical background. Maybe you're a numbers person. Maybe in your career and your job, things have to be perfect, and that's what you're good at. Sometimes you kind of have to set that aside with drums and with music, and you have to just let loose and have fun. So don't get me wrong, there's something to be said for that. And so that was a good thing that was developing while I was in high school, that I had to then figure out how to go back and kind of polish and fine tune and cultivate. But that whole thing of not listening was not a very good thing, because then whenever I played with a band, when I started actually playing gigs, my playing did not sound good, obviously, and that was a problem. What happened was I turned into a chops drummer. Way number 3 that this stunted my growth. I turned into a chops drummer, a sloppy one who sounded totally amateur. And so when I say I turned into a chops drummer, I did not turn into Dave Weckl. I did not turn into Buddy Rich. I turned into some sort of sloppy, crazy amateur version of that, where a lot of my fills were very quiet and fast. Everything was kind of fluttery, schizophrenic, and just not musical, because whenever I felt like I needed to build up some energy in my playing, that meant speed in my mind. I would play faster rather than play something that's very impactful and intentional and specific. And so there was no precision, and things were just a mess. I was only paying attention to myself and not listening or serving the song. And so all of this was kind of working together to cause me to not play musically, to not sound very good, to not know how to be a good band drummer, because I was stuck focusing on myself. So now let's turn this around. Let's dig into the more positive side of this whole lesson. I want you to learn from my mistakes. The point of this video isn't just to share with you how badly I practiced in high school. Of course, I want you to learn from this, because like I said, you can grow, you can make progress even practicing quietly. I had to learn a few things, and I've learned a lot of this the hard way. So let's talk about 3 practice tips for avoiding this. And I'm also going to share with you some great gear suggestions. I got some stuff sitting around back here to show you that makes quiet practicing easy. If you're able to spend a few bucks, it's really going to help you out. So we're going to get into that too. But first, 3 practice tips for avoiding all of the growth stunts, all the plateauing and all the problems that I encountered. So number 1, always practice hand technique on a regular practice pad. Or on your snare, ideally. Like ideally, you practice it on your actual snare. But we're assuming we've got to practice quietly. Practice hand technique on a practice pad that offers pretty good rebound, versus in my kit there, you've got the rubber pad and then a towel and who knows what else on there. You really can't practice hand technique into a soft, squishy surface like that, unless you're specifically trying to work out your forearm, and that's a topic for another video. But when you're working on grip and fulcrum and rebound and all of that, you need to have a surface that's actually responsive. So make sure that you are practicing on something where you can hear the articulation, like hear the sound. You don't want to play into like a pillow or a towel, something that's so silent you can't really hear the distinct. Because you need to know, are you in time? So as you're working on your singles, are you in time? And speaking of which, what do you practice when you're practicing on that practice pad? We're not just sitting there, hammering out stuff and checking boxes and saying, all right, I did my 8s. Maybe you come from a marching band background, and so you sit there and you practice your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't just do it to check the box. You want to be paying attention to things like grip and fulcrum. And so a big thing that you want to practice is establishing a fulcrum point. Like, okay, where are we going to pinch the stick? And when I say pinch, I don't mean squeeze. I mean form an axle. where the stick is going to rest right here. I like to go between thumb and middle finger about right here. We've got all these other lessons here on the channel going more in depth about this that I'll link below for you to check out. But this is the core thing that we want to work on and make sure that this is happening, because it's not what you practice, it's not the exercise, it's what are you gaining from it? How are you practicing it? What kinds of things are you focusing on as you practice? That's what's so much more important than just checking the box and doing the exercise. And so practice those slow singles. I always recommend doing like slow quarter notes at 60 or eighth notes. And as a matter of fact, one of my favorite exercises, I call it the singles subdivision exercise, where we're just subdividing the beat, meaning, okay, if we play quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, we can then subdivide that beat and go twice as fast, basically, like cutting the beat in half, which is eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. We could subdivide further, instead of cutting it in half, cut it into thirds. That gives us eighth note triplets, 1 olet, 2 olet, 3 olet, 4 olet. Then we could subdivide even further into fourths, so that's sixteenths, 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and if we keep this nice and simple, then from there we go back. So we've got quarters, eighths, eighth triplets, sixteenths. Just practice those one after the other and work your way backwards again. That's a great exercise to do to really build your time, because you've got your quarter note metronome going on while you're doing this. All the while you're focusing on grip, you're practicing on your pad. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 olet, 2 olet, 3 olet, 4 olet, 1 E and 2 E and back to triplets, and then eighths, and then quarters, and so on. Very simple like that, but that can be very challenging when you're trying to feel that change in subdivision, but it helps so much with building your time. And this is, so total side note, we could go into a whole bunch of things from here. This helps a lot with fill transitions. If you're trying to get better at going from a fill into a groove and back in without losing the beat, without train wrecking, this is a great exercise, because the challenge of going from groove to fill and fill to groove is usually a change in subdivision. Maybe the fill is sixteenths, the groove is eighths. So practice going from eighths into sixteenths, doing that with your metronome. Do this single subdivision exercise with an alternating sticking, like 1, 2, 3, 4. No rules here as far as how you do this. You can get creative with it, but you can really gain a lot from this. And so that's a great thing to practice when you're playing on your pad. So have a decent practice pad. I'll tell you a little more about this pad and some of the other practice gear a little later, but this is a great one for just getting in some great pad practice that feels realistic. And then from there, you can play on, you know, the muffled down kit, the quiet kit, whatever, and work on what you need to. But definitely make sure you're always starting with that hand technique, because that's so crucial. Practice tip number 2, make sure you're always hearing yourself when you're practicing. So what you don't want to use are headphones that block out a lot of sound. So if you're playing on a practice kit that's really quiet, whether you're doing mesh heads, whatever kind of muffled down kit, you don't want to be like practicing with earbuds that are in your ears, or like in-ears, headphones that close, or something that's sound canceling, because you're not going to hear yourself at all. You'll only hear the music you're playing along to. So it would be like me in high school, where it was a blast. I'm just playing along, having fun. I feel like I sound like the drummer on the record, even though I clearly don't, but ignorance is bliss, right? That's the situation you'll find yourself in. So really what you want to do, I recommend, so this is just me, if you have AirPods, Apple AirPods, they're great for this. And I don't know if some of the other Bluetooth headphones will do this, but AirPods have transparency mode, where it'll activate a small microphone there that allows the sound to go through, basically. So you can have the AirPods in, hear the music, whatever you're listening to, and also hear your surroundings. And so, because I bought those because of doing so many Zoom calls and stuff back in 2020. And so I realized they were great for practicing. If I'm sitting here practicing quietly, I can hear every nuance of what I do quietly on my pad and on my practice kit while listening to a song, while listening to the metronome when I've got the AirPods in. And then if I move over to the real kit, I can switch them over to sound canceling mode and then play on loud drums. And so AirPods are actually an excellent practice tool. If you're going back and forth between quiet practice and then playing on the full kit, they can be really useful for that. Or if you don't have AirPods, totally fine. Something else I've done many times, I did this in my apartment back in the day. I would just set up a Bluetooth speaker out in front of the kit, and I would have my metronome going through the Bluetooth speaker, so no headphones. And if I was going to play something along with a song, just crank the song up through the Bluetooth speaker and play along. That way I knew I could hear myself, because you don't want to bury your sound. You've got to hear yourself and know if you're locking in. Just don't have layers of foam and towels on your drums. Even if if you have like one layer of something muffling down your drums, just leave it at the one layer. They're not necessarily going to get that much quieter by adding layers. Really what happens, the more layers you add on there, the more of the higher frequencies you're cutting off so that the drums sound quieter to your ear. But there's still going to be the low frequencies. There's still going to be that thumping. You could put a whole bunch of blankets and towels on your kick drum, and the overall volume will come down a little bit, but the thumping is still going to be there. And if you have neighbors below you, they're still going to hear that. It'll be a little bit softer, but the low end is still there. So that's the thing about, stacking muffling material on your drums. I wasn't thinking about that, obviously, when I was in high school. I could have gotten by just with the towel without the foam pads, or maybe just the foam pads, not adding the towels, and it wouldn't have really been any louder downstairs, honestly. Practice tip number 3, play on a real acoustic kit as often as possible. Maybe you're playing at your church and there's an acoustic kit there, or maybe a really nice electric kit. I don't love electric kits, if I'm honest with you, but a really nice electric kit is a fairly realistic way to practice. The hi-hats aren't quite as realistic as they ought to be. We'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about gear. But maybe at your church there's an acoustic kit. If so, that's awesome. And so if you're playing there every Sunday, that gives you great opportunity to get used to the feel of an acoustic kit so that you know how the instrument feels when it's not muffled down. Ideally though, because that was me once, eventually in high school, I was playing with the student worship band at my church, so I was playing on an acoustic kit every week, but I wasn't practicing on one. So ideally, you practice on one. That way you're able to spend some time really getting familiar with the kit. So you're not in the hot seat, you're not under pressure, you're not having to play with people. You can just sit there and play around with it. How does this feel? Getting used to it so that you can apply that feeling, that framework, that mindset of playing to your practice kit, so that when you sit down to the practice kit, you can go, okay, I know how this is different from the acoustic kit, so how can I adjust to compensate? I know I need to not hit cymbals too hard. I know I can hit my snare pretty hard and the kick pretty hard. That way everything mixes well and sounds good on the acoustic kit. By the way, that's like a core principle of rock drumming. You want to have a nice strong kick, a nice strong snare, but don't go too heavy on the cymbals. That'll always sound great and record great, and honestly not sound super loud even in a fairly small room. It's usually the cymbals that get too loud. So when you're practicing on your practice kit, you want to make sure you're not going too heavy on the cymbals, because if you do that on the real kit in a smaller room, it's going to wash out and not sound great. And so that's something that you want to be aware of, and that's something you end up noticing when you practice on an acoustic kit. This was something I ended up doing later on when I was living in an apartment a few years ago. The church I was playing at the time, I would go over there and I would play on the acoustic drums there in the sanctuary for like 2 or 3 hours on a particular afternoon of the week. And so that was so helpful, getting over there and just playing and getting out of my apartment and making some noise. That was so helpful. And so if you're able to work out any amount of practice time, even if it's once a week, once every 2 weeks, on an acoustic kit, maybe it's at your friend's house, maybe it's at your church, maybe it's at a local practice space, maybe you can like rent a practice space with some friends or with your band and split the rent, where you can just go into a room and practice every once in a while. I've had students do that, and that can be so helpful. That way you've just got the freedom to not have noise constraints and just have fun. But that helps so much. That way you're not all stuck within that bubble of the practice kit. All right, let's talk about some gear. So some of my favorite gear for practicing, I love the Aquarian SuperPad. That's the pad that you see on my snare all the time. In so many videos, I can just sit here and be hitting it while I'm talking to you. It's a great pad because it's not hard. Like, I can press my finger into it and it has some give. It's like a foam material with this really durable layer on the outside. It's a little bit rough. Kind of like I don't know, it's like a nylon-ish kind of canvasy rain jacket material. I don't know exactly what it is. But these pads are great. They're so durable and they feel really good. The thing about Evans Real Feel and some of those hard rubber pads, they're made to emulate the feel of a marching snare, not so much a drum set snare, and they're really hard on your hands, where as you're playing, you feel that shock of the stick in your hand. Now that encourages very loose grip, which isn't a bad thing. We want very loose grip. But honestly, I would rather have a pad that doesn't feel like knocking on a block of wood. And so the SuperPad is great for that. This can be a standalone pad you can just set in your lap, or you can snap it onto a drum. It's got this rubber gasket that allows you to snap it in place. And so you can buy them different sizes. You could buy one for your toms. You can get one for your kick drum. And so you can potentially outfit an entire kit with these. I love it just for like as a practice pad, for pad practice on my snare. Now, if I'm practicing playing grooves and I want to practice my loud playing, something that's always a challenge is practicing rim shots. because there's no quiet way to practice a rim shot. Even if you've got like a great mesh head on your snare, you still have to hit the metal rim if you're gonna play a rim shot. But this is one of my favorites, the RTOM Black Hole. This is a mesh head that's like a standalone head. Like you can set this thing in your lap and play on it. So it's kind of that trampoline material. Got this patch in the middle, and you can tighten and loosen it with this ring here. You expand the ring to tighten it, shrink the ring to loosen it. And so this, you can snap it onto your snare, and you can play rim shots, and they're very soft. I can sit here and like practice rim shots. My microphone's in the way here, so I can't snap it onto this snare. But you can hear how I can just sit here and play rim shots and talk right over them. Nice and quiet. I did this all the time in my apartment. And so, because what'll happen if you have to play loud gigs, and if you want to keep your wrist and your forearm strength up, you've got to be able to practice the way you're going to perform. And so being able to play rim shots in your practicing is super beneficial, because otherwise you kind of lose that muscle memory of how a rim shot feels if you can't practice it. And then you get there at the gig and it's like, wait, how do I do a rim shot? And it takes some adjustment, but this allows you to actually practice it and get really solid and consistent with your rim shots, and then apply that to the acoustic, the real kit. By the way, these are unofficial endorsements. I'm just a big fan of Aquarian SuperPad. I'm a big fan of RTOM Black Hole. This is stuff that I bought when I lived in an apartment because it helped me out so much. So something else that I really have come to like, this company, their new company called TruSound drums, and they sent me these not too long ago to try out. They're not paying me to talk about them today. I'm talking about them because they sent them to me, I've tried them out, and I really like them. These are really cool. So they're a lot like the Remo silent stroke heads, but better, because they've got this patch that's glued on here that allows it to feel much more like an actual drum, kind of like the RTOM Black Hole does. The Remo silent strokes I think are too springy and they just don't feel realistic, but these actually feel great on toms. And I've been really impressed with how this feels on kick. It's kind of hard to find like a realistic kick practice head. The Aquarian SuperPad on kick is kind of cool, it sounds cool, but it doesn't feel very realistic. But this and 20-inch, 22-inch on your kick drum, it does sound kind of cool actually. If you leave the resonant head on, you can hear some rumble, but much quieter, and it feels much like a kick drum. And when you're playing on the toms, when you're playing the TruSound heads on your toms, if you close your eyes and I guess close your ears somehow or another, you can convince yourself that you're playing on actual heads, because it just has a very realistic response. And of course, whenever you're doing mesh heads on toms or on your kick, you can tune your resonant heads to wherever you want them so that you can actually get some quiet tone out of the mesh heads, because there's always going to be some resonance there. Or if you need to be super quiet, like really quiet, you can put mesh heads on, put these TruSound heads on your kick and toms, and then take off the resonant heads. That way there's no hum, there's no thump or low end at all from the kick, and it's just super no low end. Because if you get rid of that low end, that's what translates through walls of an apartment building or walls of your dorm. And so take out that low end thump where all you're hearing is, you know, that right there. That doesn't really go through walls. That's not going to go through the floor, and so that's super quiet. So I've been a huge fan of these. These have been great. So check them out. I've got a link in the description. You can buy a set of the TruSound heads, put those on your toms and kick, and you can totally put one on your snare too. They feel great on snare because you can get these tuned exactly where you want them, and so you can tune a floor tom to feel like a floor tom, tune a snare to feel like a snare. Or if you want to spend a little extra money, get the RTOM Black Hole and make that your dedicated snare practice head. I definitely recommend the SuperPad because it's such a great practice pad. And as for cymbals, I definitely recommend, here it is, Zildjian L80. I love these. I bought these back when I lived in an apartment, just a couple years after they came out, I think, and was so impressed and just blown away by how quiet they are. Like the fact that I can sit here and talk to you while I'm hitting a cymbal. I use them in lessons with students too, where like the student can be playing on the cymbal and I'm talking to them and we're not having to yell over the sound of a cymbal. You can hear the articulation so clearly. The hi-hats are very realistic, so much better than any E-kit out there. When you have these as your practice cymbals, you get way more realistic cymbal practice than even on the nicest Roland electric kit there is. And so if you have a nice electric kit, what I recommend you do is actually ditch the electric cymbals just for realistic practice sake, and then put these on as your cymbals. Get the Zildjian L80s, L80 hi-hats. And so that in combination with your nice electric kit is very realistic. Or with your TruSound heads on tom and kick, or your RTOM Black Hole on the snare, that combined with these, that is a killer practice kit. And it's the most realistic feeling practice setup I've created. Mine has always been morphing. When I lived in an apartment, I had to mess around with things. And even today, I've still got the practice kit set up here in the studio. as I'm testing out new ideas and figuring out, okay, how can I play a little nice and quietly if I need to practice real quick. Now, something that we got to add. What I recommend you do, because remember earlier we were talking about making sure you can still hear yourself while you're playing along the songs. You could do that either having the song playing through a Bluetooth speaker while you're playing on the mesh head L80 kit, or maybe you've got AirPods, transparency mode. That's great. That's perfect. What you could also do, this is just a suggestion, definitely don't feel like you have to do this, but you could set up either a USB mic or a handheld recorder out in front of your kit and have that audio go into your computer, have your headphones plugged into your computer. That way you're hearing what a microphone is picking up of your kit, and then you can just go over to, Apple Music, Spotify, whatever, and have music playing, and then mix those accordingly from your computer. That way you're hearing everything, and you're hearing the song you're playing along to, and you're hearing your kit. I've done that before, and that's great. You can even do that on a gig, actually. If you need like a kind of a DIY in-ear monitor system on a gig, set up a little handheld recorder out in front of your kit and have that go to your ears so you can hear everything in a more controlled sort of environment. So that can be really cool. Do it either with a USB mic, especially if you already have one, or I have this old Tascam handheld digital recorder from 2008 that still works, believe it or not, that is great for this kind of thing. Of course, that technology is way better now, 14 years later. And so you can find some great affordable options for making those kinds of things work. But that way you can actually hear what you're doing as you're practicing and still hear your metronome and still hear your songs and still have fun. Because we want that best of both worlds. We want to be able to have fun. We want to be able to just have a blast and be like the high schooler who just doesn't care and who's just having fun. But then we've also got to be able to focus down and think, okay, are we sounding good? Are we being precise? Am I hitting the snare evenly? Am I being nice and strong and clean on the kick? Am I practicing cleanliness and consistency with my hi-hat and how open or closed it is? That's something that, get the L80s, that'll help a lot with that. That way you can really practice hi-hat work. Those are things you can't do on an electric kit, at least not well, and you can't do it with, muffled mutes on your hi-hats either. So the L80s are so much better for that. So as we close, my question for you, have you noticed any of these bad habits that we talked about today in your practicing? And can you take any of these tips, any of these practice tips or gear tips, any of these suggestions to practice more musically and effectively? That's what I want to know. You can leave a comment below if you want to, but I want to get you thinking about that. I want to get you thinking, are you noticing that, man, I'm kind of playing more from my hands than from my ears, or I'm not really able to hear myself when I'm practicing? If any of those things are going on, which of these practice steps can you take? Is it time to maybe invest a little bit of money in some good practice gear? That is really worthwhile. If you're investing some money in something that's going to help you practice more and practice more effectively, that is a good investment. I'm not much of a gear guy, and I'm not going to just tell you to buy stuff, but I will definitely tell you to invest in some good practice gear if you're ready. If you're committed to learning the drums and maybe you've got a less than ideal practice setup right now, I strongly encourage you to check out the TruSound heads, the Aquarian SuperPad, RTOM, blackhole, Zildjian L80s, and there are other products like this out there. These are my favorites. I definitely recommend you start with these. So maybe that's the step you need to take, or maybe you need to spend some more time working on grip on your practice pad before actually playing on the electric kit or playing on the muffled down kit. That way you've got some very intentional practice, making sure that you've got the rebound going on and all of those things are happening. Maybe you just need to figure out a way to hear yourself better. Set up a microphone out there, whatever you got to do there. So think about this, think through, all right, how can I practice more effectively? How can I make sure that I don't develop bad habits and I don't stagnate and become a drummer that doesn't listen well and doesn't play musically like Steven did when he was in high school? I don't want you to make my mistakes. I want you to learn from them. So know that you can master the drums even if you've got to practice quietly. All these tips and all these gear suggestions are really going to help you. These are things that I've done, that I've worked through, and so I hope this is encouraging to you. Hope this empowers you to go and figure out how you can practice more effectively. All right, as always, thanks for hanging out, guys. It's been fun. Be sure to check out that 6 Steps to Session Drumming guide while you're here. Because if you need to know what to practice and you feel like you're just lost because you don't have a reliable path to reach your goals and reach your dreams, that's your guide. That is your path to getting from wherever you're at, whether it's beginner, intermediate, to sounding like a session drummer, having that studio polished feel. This is all the core essentials that you need to know and that you need to implement into your practicing to make sure you're getting there. This guide is so cool because you'll be able to pinpoint exactly which stage you're in. You'll quickly be able to identify, okay, that's me. I'm definitely in this stage, and then follow the action steps so then you can level up to the next stage, and there you've got a clear path. Sometimes all you need is a clear path. When suddenly the path is there in front of you and you know what the next step is to take, and then the next step after that, that's when you start growing. That's when you start making progress. And so that's what I want for you, and I'm pretty sure that's what you want too. You just gotta focus in, hunker down, put in the work, be disciplined with it. But I hope this is motivating, because know that you can do it. All right, thanks for watching today. I'll see you on the next video. Have a great week. Stay non-glamorous.